Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today on the Roundup for Wednesday, March 16th, 2022, we're going to be answering the following three questions we've been hearing from international educators this past week. First up, how do students view different destination countries? Second, what are the must-dos in international student recruitment? And finally, why aren't U.S. institutions divesting from Russia more quickly? We'll take a look at those three questions and more today on the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. So as we do each week, we take the three questions that we answer on the Roundup from our newsletter that comes out on Monday mornings, 9 a.m. Eastern. If you aren't already subscribed, you can go to smieconsulting.org/subscribe, enter your details, and we'll get you added to that newsletter mailing list. So you have these ideas fresh in your inbox on Monday morning as you start your work weeks and have a chance to think about what those three themes that we'll cover more in depth here on the Roundup will be. If you'd like a copy of the most recent edition, I'm dropping the link, along with the links for all the stories that we're covering today, into the comments section for the Facebook Live event that we're doing today. So let's get started with our first question. How do students view different destination countries? This is the kind of thing that for those that have been following the Roundup for a while, you know that we talk about our 6 Ps of strategic international enrollment management. And the first P is perspective. And this kind of perspective, this kind of knowledge on how your competitor destination markets are doing in overall student impressions and experiences, this helps you better articulate your benefits as compared to other countries, as compared to the U.S. average as a whole or the North American average as a whole. And we're talking specifically today about the International Student Barometer. For those who have been in the industry a while, you probably are familiar with this. This is put out by iGraduate. And iGraduate, I think, has teamed up with another organization now to produce these. But they do regularly, through the ISB, kind of experiential reports from students on their impressions of how their country of choice for study has handled different aspects of the student life experience. So they've broken it down into, they've had, in the course of this iGraduate process for this series of evaluations, they've gotten over 4 million student responses that represent 1,500 different institutions in 40 participating countries from where these students are coming. So they also, through all those student impressions, they break down their analysis into 4 main areas: UK and Ireland, Europe, Asia, and US and Canada. So interestingly, they don't have one separate for Australia and New Zealand. So interesting to see why that might be. But in terms of what they do cover, each of these 4 geographic areas in terms of destinations for students is what the focus of the student evaluations is. And I think it's important they don't do country breakdowns beyond UK and Ireland are the only 2, the US and Canada are 2, but the rest cover entire continents. So there's not really an apples to apples in terms of countries that we can talk about. But what these do represent is kind of a very broad-based student representation of how students evaluate the U.S. and the U.K. or Asia or European destinations for their study. And the evaluations for this particular round are broken down into these 4 areas, as I mentioned, 4 regions: UK and Ireland, Europe, Asia, and US and Canada. So for the North American folks, it says North American, but it doesn't include Mexico, interestingly. But what it does say is what it does allow you to get access to. You can get the session recording. You fill out your details for any of the 4 regions that you want to get the recordings of. It gives you the whys as well as the hows and the whens for how the barometer was conducted. It was the webinar that you get access to for the North American higher ed institutions against global performance indexes. Show are from March when this was recorded, so it is current. What it does give you is overall satisfaction in terms of student satisfaction overall in North America with institutional responses to COVID, to value for money, to student work experiences. All of these things are part of what these reports cover. So the barometer is now being done twice a year, with the first wave in April, May that we're seeing, and then one later in the year. So I think what's important about these is why having this perspective on how the U.S. is viewed, and the U.S. and in this case Canada are viewed by international students around the world. That gives you an idea of what their perspectives of us are as a destination compared to the average. And what does show from these this ISB report in terms of overall satisfaction, the U.S. and Canada do rate very highly, 89% overall satisfaction in North America. And it gives you what that overall number is, but it also tells you how much higher than the global average you are. So that'll tell you comparatively how much better you might be doing than the rest of the world in terms of student perception and experience. So I think it's really valuable data to have, and just impression data. And these are from student experiences. So these are the folks who have actually come to our campuses, gone to our colleges, through our courses, are looking for work, and are at the end of their student journeys. So I think it's very useful to have this as part of your evaluation of what should our messaging be. And this is something I work with a number of my institutional clients on, is when you're developing your core values. The ironic thing is the core values are very similar across institution types around the country, but where the differentiators are is how you talk about those values to an international audience. And the kind of value you can pull from this ISB report or any of these other kind of global benchmarking of student experiences, not prospective student impressions of what your campus might be like or what the U.S. is like as a destination, but overall how the U.S. is viewed. Having that as part of your language that you can refer to in some of your messaging about quality of programs, about value for money, about international climates, about academic integrity, whatever it might be that you have identified as your values, and how you communicate those values to your international audiences will differ from how you talk about value to a U.S. student in a U.S. high school who is eligible for federal financial aid that your international students are not. So having that perspective built into how you talk about your values will help you better assess your overall messaging, and individually your conversations that you have with students to share with them how you are different and how your college can be a great destination for them. So I think these benchmarking pieces that where you're looking at how students who have gone through the process, who are living that experience on campus or at the end of their student experience, sharing their experiences, that is data that can really help speak, though it's not going to be specific for your institution, it can help speak to your impressions of what that might look like. So great ideas here from in terms of, I think, food for thought that you can get out of these in terms of how it impacts your messaging. But I encourage all of you to check out these recordings for the different regions, and particularly North America ones, to really get a sense for how your institution type, your country is viewed by students who are living with it here and now. So that's our first question for the day. So having that perspective is going to be a key part, or should be a key part of any institution's international messaging. So on to question 2. What are the must-dos in international student recruitment? I talk about this question almost in every conversation with my colleagues on the institutional side, as I do my consults, as I have these one-on-one calls with individuals, or just trying to get a sense of what am I missing? Take a look at what we're doing, see if we're missing any holes in terms of our approach to recruitment, in terms of messaging, in terms of countries we might be overlooking, in terms of recruitment strategies in particular countries. And this is a topic that it's where the rubber meets the road, right? In terms of, you can have the best idea, you can have a well thought out strategic plan, but unless you have the implementation and follow-up pieces in place to make your recruitment efforts and plans worthwhile, you miss the whole point. And I think what I've seen over the years in terms of the must-dos of international student recruitment, I see a lot of people who take who will take the stance that we need to be front and center wherever our target audiences are. We need to have a presence there. We need to be in country. We need to be on the road. And then the pandemic came along, and look what happened. It's changed everybody's plans. If you weren't already fully virtual, you became so quickly. And for the better part of 2 years, that was your approach. And only very recently have institutions been able to even think about going overseas and doing it in a very targeted way, and maybe single country or region-specific tours rather than globetrotting for 2 or 3 weeks or a month when you might be facing all sorts of testing and quarantine protocols that you, even if you're fully vaccinated, that you might need to accommodate in your scheduling. So I think planning is important. Absolutely have to think about something before you do it. It's just good advice no matter what you're doing in life. But it also requires to be successful in terms of must-dos. You want to have something that goes a little bit further than that. You got to have a better overall perspective on things, that you have an opportunity to really approach your vision for where you want your institution to be in a strategic way, but also in ways that allow you to achieve goals that you set out and to do it efficiently and effectively. What I've done recently, there's a series I've just started with IDP Connect, one of the folks I've been working with for about 4 years now, that looks at, it's called International Education Leaders Share. Intl Ed Leaders Share is the hashtag for it. I've did a video version interview with Patrice Campbell at Millersville University in Pennsylvania before Christmas, but that video hasn't been released yet. But the first article was with an interview I did with Samira Pardonani at Shoreline Community College in Washington State. And Samira's been in the business almost 25 years now, and so she much of that has been at Shoreline, where she's risen to associate vice president level at that community college for student services and international education. So she's been a leader in NAFSA for years and very well regarded in the field. And as far as community college leaders in international ed goes, she's right up there with the best. So had the chance to interview her about some of her thoughts on these kind of must-dos, and the impact of the pandemic and that type of thing. She had a really important perspective on this that I think is is useful to bring up as we talk about must-dos. I think she's realized that business as usual is no longer a thing when it comes to student recruitment, and that returning to normal, it might be coming, or at many campuses might be there. The reality is they really will never entirely go back, I don't think, to the same way U.S. colleges were pre-pandemic. And what I think has happened is the successes that you have had as an institution, often, particularly when it might be going against the flow in terms of where your campus is compared to competitors. It's important to keep in place a couple of kind of guiding principles that you need to, and Samira does say this quite well in her interview. She says that yes, the pandemic changed how we recruit students, but it forced us, if you weren't already, it forced us to become innovative in how we approached, because innovation is the mother of invention, or mother of invention is innovation, one of those two. But anyway, and it forces you to innovate, and it forces you to become more agile than you were potentially already. And those two traits, being innovative and agile in how you approach international student recruitment, are ones that I think put you in good standing for how you will adjust to the kinds of challenges, frankly, we have in international education. And certainly the pandemic was probably the largest single thing that threw everything into off kilter for international educators around the world, but certainly well beyond our international education sphere. The whole country, the whole globe had been impacted so far by this pandemic. Not the first global event to do that. 9/11 certainly had long-ranging implications for how we recruited internationally after that happened in 2001. It took many years, 4 or 5 years, before we really regained strength of our initial positions. That might be a little bit quicker this time around than what happened in 9/11, but you certainly see that the kind of recruiting you do now is different. There will still be a need for virtual events, and I think I know many of my colleagues who have their tour businesses, their in-person tour companies that they've had for years. They had to do a very radical rethink about how they were going to approach things during the pandemic. They all went to various providers, either came up with their own platforms or partnered with another platform to build an online option for individuals that wanted to recruit students in countries that they previously had expertise in or were doing physical tours to. There are some of those folks are already transitioning back to in-person tours this spring, and I think that's a real positive that they are able to do that. But the question will be, I think, in terms of the demand from institutions who still want to be able to recruit virtually, because they know they're not going to be trotting the globe ever in anytime soon to recruit students, because frankly that's not them. They don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the budget, they don't have the real desire to do that. That might come longer term, but coming out of the pandemic, there's a lot of folks that are gun shy in terms of what the implications are for travel during, which is still a pandemic. There's now the Delta Omicron variant, the Delcrom or something like that, Delcrom, Delmicron, whatever that new variant that's a combination of Omicron and Delta is now a thing. And starting in Hong Kong and making its way around the world. There's cases in the U.S. already. Is it going to be anywhere near as severe? Are the vaccines going to be as effective as they have been? All of those questions are starting to percolate back up. But I think the need for virtual options is still going to be there. Whether or not the providers that have been doing them in the interim will continue. We already know that folks like FPP, EduMedia, they've committed to going completely virtual. That's all they're going to do now. Certainly there's going to be some that you can rely on that have become and developed very good reputations for fairs during the pandemic, that there's still going to be a demand. People are still going to be needing that. It's from the institution side and maybe not as much from the student side, but you're going to still see that as a real focus, I think, for a lot of institutions' attention when it comes to recruitment moving forward. So Samir's article, I'm dropping the link to that in the comments section on the Facebook page as well for the Facebook Live event we're doing today. But I do want to also share when she talks about recruiting, she pays particular attention to SEO. She has a marketing team that focuses on this, using particular lead gen search services, social media marketing. Virtual fairs are part of her piece. They have translated information that they have on their website in 12 languages, that the content that they have is much more dynamic, much more user-friendly for students. So we're really interested to see where and she makes a very, very strong point about the need to have a variety of sources and not just put all your eggs in one basket when it comes to either. They obviously, Shoreline has used agents for a number of years. That's a part of their function too. They mention that as part of their strategy, but it's one piece. It's not a single silver bullet approach. They attend all the conferences, NAFSA, Education USA, International ACAC, all of these. They do their research through Open Doors. So the article really, I think, is a great summation of how you can do it and do it well when it comes to international student recruitment. A second piece that I'm including in this mix is one by an old colleague of mine, Stephen Boyd, formerly of University of Bridgeport, before that University of New Haven. He's now at Unification Theological Seminary as a Dean of Enrollment and member, and he's written an article for UniQuest that's entitled Successful International Recruitment, Some Factors to Consider. And he goes through, and he's a longtime vet at numerous institutions and has a really good perspective on things. And he identifies 3 essential elements for him that are key to success in the long term. First is the foundational build your team. And that's if it's 1 or 2, 3 people within an admissions office that have international responsibilities as part of their portfolio, or 2 or 3 if you're in a larger institution that has already an established presence overseas, might have 2 or 3 recruiters doing that for you. But then it's also the team. The team is not just the front end folks. It's the backroom staff that are processing applications. It's the folks that are doing your social media. It's any of your marketing team on campus that might be helping with different parts of what you do on the recruitment side. It will be with alumni and students that you might be partnering with. So Steve makes a great point in terms of talking about the importance of that team. And so it's not just hopefully all on one person. Even if you are a one-person office, doesn't mean you have to do it all alone, or should do it all alone, or can do it all alone. You need help. And if some of those resources may be on campus, some of them will not be. But it's in terms of knowing what you need to know. And if you're a manager, certainly part of that puzzle is for those that you do have on your team, whether as employees or as volunteers, it's knowing each other's strengths, each of your members' strengths, and help to kind of direct them accordingly to parts of your recruitment plan that make the most sense for where you want your institution to be longer term. So in addition to building your team, it's serving your students and your staff, and that's being student-centered is kind of an odd phrase to say we should be. Of course, student recruitment, you should be student focused, but not everybody is, unfortunately. And that means responding to prospective students' needs and desires and wants and that type of thing, and not make it all about you, and not make it just, oh, here goes another student saying the same thing I've heard for the 15th time today, but actually answering it honestly and openly, and just making sure that your students are seeing that you're going that extra mile. But it also means that your staff need to be taken care of too, because like, for example, the pandemic infected everybody, and not everybody handled it as the same way. Some people went down some very dark rabbit holes and places in their lives, and takes time to come back. Some people who feed off social interaction and didn't have that for the better part of a year or more when they weren't on campus to have regular staff meetings or interactions with people, folks in person, that it takes a toll on you. So caring for your staff is as important as serving your students, and making sure that everybody is okay to do what they need to do. And a final piece that Stephen talks about is partnering in a highly competitive industry. And this is something that certainly when I first started in the profession, and Stephen and Samira both have long careers as well, that international education, international student recruitment was a very different beast back in the early mid-90s than it is today. There are so many more players on the world stage in terms of competitor countries, competitor institutions within each of those countries that are going for the same students, and maybe a different kind of student that might be coming to your institution, but they're all out there actively recruiting students from overseas. And that acknowledging that and knowing that goes back to that perspective argument I was talking about at the beginning. Knowing what the competition are doing, knowing that we're in a business that it's not just a student that you're recruiting might also be applying to your large state university neighbor or your private college, elite selective private college near you. Your competitors are all around the world, and it's just that perspective should change the way you talk about your institution or how you position yourself in the market. And it's important that you're in partnering with people with others that can help you get where you need to be, because you can't do it all on your own anymore. And I don't think you ever could really effectively. But you need providers. You need in-country reps, whether that be through educational agents you sign up, or Education USA representatives you work with for presentations, or alumni, or school officials that you do virtual events with. You need a global network to be effective in your target markets. So knowing that you need that kind of global network, that you have developed partners that are on the same page as you in terms of process, in terms of what your goals are as an institution, that matters. And when you take it as a whole, and you take the approach that if I don't have the right partners, I'm going to be missing out. I will not be as effective as I could be in particular markets. So I think that's really key moving forward, that particularly if you're in a leadership role in an international office, that you have that kind of approach that, hey, we're not going to be able to do this on our own. Not even if we put all our resources together on campus, are we going to be able to do it on our own? We need help from outside. And that could be parents of current students, that could be the agents, that could be EduUSA, that could be secondary school counselor networks, that could be travel that you do, that could be service providers that give you translations of your content in different languages. It could be having someone who provides a platform where you can have conversations with students in particular countries. So all of those things are valuable to have, and knowing that your network of who is a part of your team, unofficially or officially, is a realization that it goes far beyond just your campus-based team. If you're going to be truly successful and truly engaged on a number of different levels in successfully recruiting students and keeping them. So our final question of the day: why aren't U.S. institutions divesting from Russia? This is a question that's starting to bug me. We've seen what's happened in Ukraine. We've seen how now over 300 companies have joined in their divestment efforts from businesses that they are doing, or business that they have either in the country of Russia, or doing business by buying Russian goods, whatever it might be. We've seen over 300 companies now that have committed to divesting from Russia. We've had global sanctions applied by the Western world and a number of other key partners around the world, but not all. We've seen the BRICS trying to, I mentioned the BRIC countries last time. We're talking Brazil, we're talking Russia, obviously, India, China, and South Africa. None of those countries have joined in the global sanctions against Russia. But what we have seen is, generally across at the association level in the United States and in Europe, we've seen associations of institutions. We talked about the European research institutions last week, kicking out 12 members of the Russian member institutions from their body because of the rectors of those institutions signing a letter of support for President Putin's invasion, special military operation. So we've seen universities in Europe start to move against ties, and in Europe it's harder. Frankly, it's a lot harder because they have closer economic and financial relationships with institutions in Russia, and because of their geographic proximity. But we also have universities that have stood up and started to say, hey, we are cutting our ties with any European companies or institutions that we have relationships with. You've seen, as I mentioned last week, MIT stood up on the day after the invasion to end ties with an institute that they had begun in Russia. You've seen Stanford also say that they're going to be divesting from Russian ties. And other than some billionaires, I think there are 4 oligarchs that have donated significant sums to U.S. institutions. Those were profiled in a Chronicle article last week, and that's in the newsletter as well. But there has, outside of the associations, you have, and a couple of outliers at the top level, you have not seen a big push by individual institutions putting out summary statements on how their institution stands with relations with Russian institutions, divesting from their endowments from any Russian sources, returning gifts from Russian oligarchs that might be under sanction in other countries and should be under sanction here in the U.S. as well, with the seizure of assets and property and yachts and all the wonderful things that are happening. Even football clubs in England are being seized as a result. So there are steps that haven't been taken by U.S. institutions that frankly leave me a little bit wondering what's going on. Granted, there aren't too many institutions that have a huge amount of academic ties with Russian institutions, and there might be the odd one here or there. But campuses I work with, I don't think we've had more than 5 or 6 campuses I've worked with in the last couple of years. I think there's only been one of them that had any institutional relationships with Russia. There haven't been a lot to say to divest from or to separate, cut agreements, cut ties with. But I'm asking this now. Are these conversations happening on your campus? And it's just not getting into the press. I'd be interested to see. We see when the pandemic hit, we saw the running list of institutions that have gone online for the fall term in 2020. What that might look like, who's going to be hybrid, who's going to be in person, all of that. I'd love to see a similar list tracking institutions who are cutting ties with Russia, and so it could be a number of things: cutting ties with Russian institutions, divesting anything in their endowments from Russian sources, and returning any gifts they've gotten from Russian sources. Any of these oligarchs that are under threat are under sanction. So I wonder about that, and it's be interesting to see if someone gets it in their head to put that kind of a list together, because I think that would be very telling. And as to why the U.S. higher ed community hasn't institutionally gotten on board with where a lot of other institutions in other parts of the world have. So really interesting to see what goes on next in terms of there's a lot of things that can and will happen in Russia and Ukraine before this is over, but certainly a lot of moves for colleges to start thinking seriously about divestiture from Russian affiliations institutionally, in endowment, and in terms of investments that they might have received or gifts they might have received. So we'll see where those issues go, but we'll certainly keep you posted on our takes on them here on the Roundup. But until next week, that's all we have for you for the Midweek Roundup for March 16th. We look forward to chatting with you again very soon. Cheers.